Question 1. System analysis indicates that a property manager is negotiating a new commercial lease agreement for a retail space. The landlord desires a lease that clearly defines operating expenses to ensure predictable net income. The tenant, however, has proposed language that broadly excludes certain costs from operating expenses, citing industry norms for similar retail leases. The property manager must advise the landlord on the implications of the tenant's proposed language and recommend a course of action that balances the landlord's financial interests with the tenant's reasonable expectations and regulatory compliance. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional practice and regulatory adherence for the property manager? Option A. Proceed with the lease agreement as proposed by the tenant, without further consultation with the landlord or independent verification of industry standards, to avoid delaying the lease execution. Option B. Advise the landlord to reject all of the tenant's proposed exclusions for operating expenses and insist on the landlord's original, broader definition to maximize immediate net income, without further discussion. Option C. Recommend a detailed review of the tenant's proposed exclusions, comparing them against standard commercial lease practices for the specific property type and location, and proposing clearly defined, itemized inclusions and exclusions for operating expenses that are transparent and justifiable to both parties. Option D. Advise the landlord to accept the tenant's proposed exclusions for operating expenses to expedite the lease signing and maintain a positive tenant relationship, assuming the tenant's interpretation of industry norms is accurate. The correct answer is D. Advise the landlord to accept the tenant's proposed exclusions for operating expenses to expedite the lease signing and maintain a positive tenant relationship, assuming the tenant's interpretation of industry norms is accurate. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to balance the landlord's desire for predictable income with the tenant's need for clarity and fairness in lease terms, particularly concerning operating expenses. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting these terms can lead to disputes, litigation, and damage to professional reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure the lease agreement is both legally sound and commercially viable for all parties. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed lease agreement, focusing on the definition and allocation of operating expenses. This includes verifying that all included expenses are standard for the property type and location, that the method of allocation is transparent and equitable, and that there are clear provisions for tenant review and potential dispute resolution. This aligns with the CPPM ethical obligations to act with integrity, competence, and in the best interests of both the client landlord and the tenant, ensuring compliance with relevant property management regulations that mandate fair dealing and accurate representation of lease terms. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing the landlord's immediate financial return by broadly defining operating expenses without clear limitations or tenant protections would be professionally unacceptable. This failure to ensure transparency and fairness in expense allocation violates the principle of good faith and fair dealing inherent in property management practice, and could contravene specific clauses in property management acts or codes of conduct that require clear and unambiguous lease terms. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by accepting the tenant's proposed broad exclusions from operating expenses without due diligence would also be professionally unsound. This oversight could lead to unforeseen costs for the landlord, potentially breaching the property management agreement and demonstrating a lack of competence in lease negotiation and risk assessment. A third incorrect approach that involves making assumptions about industry standards for operating expenses without consulting the specific lease draft or local market norms would be a failure of due diligence. This could result in a lease that is either overly burdensome for the tenant or insufficiently protective of the landlord's interests, leading to future disputes and potential liability. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the lease agreement, identifying key areas of potential conflict or ambiguity, such as operating expense clauses. This requires understanding the specific property, the local market, and the relevant regulatory framework. Professionals should then engage in clear communication with all stakeholders, seeking clarification and proposing amendments that ensure fairness, transparency, and legal compliance. Documenting all communications and decisions is crucial for accountability and risk management. Question 2. The efficiency study reveals that a significant amount of time is being lost in the process of tenant turnover due to extended vacancy periods following tenant departures. In a recent case, a tenant has failed to pay rent for 2 consecutive months and has become unresponsive to communication. The property owner is eager to re-rent the unit immediately to minimize financial losses. What is the most appropriate course of action for the property manager to initiate the eviction process while adhering to all legal requirements? Option A. Contact the tenant's employer to inform them of the rent arrears and request their assistance in compelling the tenant to vacate the property. Option B. Immediately serve the tenant with a formal notice to quit, specifying the legal grounds for eviction and the required time frame for vacating the premises, and prepare to file for an unlawful detainer action if the tenant does not comply. Option C. Advise the property owner to personally confront the tenant and demand immediate payment or vacation of the premises, bypassing formal legal channels. Option D. Arrange for a locksmith to change the locks on the property and remove the tenant's belongings to secure the unit for a new tenant. The correct answer is B. Immediately serve the tenant with a formal notice to quit, specifying the legal grounds for eviction and the required time frame for vacating the premises, and prepare to file for an unlawful detainer action if the tenant does not comply. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to balance the need for efficient property turnover with strict adherence to legal eviction procedures. Failure to follow the correct legal process can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and extended vacancy periods, all of which negatively impact the property owner's investment. The property manager must exercise careful judgment to ensure all legal requirements are met, even when faced with pressure to re-rent the unit quickly. The correct approach involves meticulously following the statutory notice periods and court procedures mandated by the relevant jurisdiction's landlord-tenant laws. This includes serving the tenant with the legally required notice to quit, filing the appropriate court documents if the tenant does not vacate, and obtaining a court order for possession before physically removing the tenant or their belongings. This approach is correct because it is the only method that ensures the eviction is lawful, protecting the property manager and owner from legal repercussions and ensuring a clean transfer of possession. Ethical obligations to treat tenants fairly, even during eviction, are also met by respecting their legal rights and due process. An incorrect approach of attempting to persuade the tenant to leave without formal notice or legal intervention is a regulatory failure. This bypasses the tenant's right to due process and can be construed as harassment or an illegal lockout, leading to severe penalties. Another incorrect approach of proceeding with eviction without proper documentation or court orders is a procedural failure. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the legal framework and exposes the property manager to lawsuits and fines for violating tenant rights and landlord-tenant statutes. Finally, an approach that involves changing locks or removing the tenant's property before a court-ordered eviction is a direct violation of tenant protection laws and constitutes an illegal eviction, carrying significant legal and financial consequences. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific landlord-tenant laws of the jurisdiction, maintaining detailed records of all communications and actions, and consulting with legal counsel when in doubt about any aspect of the eviction process. The primary goal should always be to achieve a lawful and orderly resolution, protecting the interests of both the property owner and the tenant's legal rights. Question 3. Market research demonstrates that proactive property maintenance and strategic tenant retention are key to maximizing long-term property value. A property manager, operating under a standard Certified Professional Property Manager (CPPM) framework in the U.S., is managing a property where a significant but not immediately critical repair is needed to prevent future issues, and a long-term, reliable tenant is requesting a minor rent reduction due to current economic pressures. The property management agreement grants the manager authority for routine maintenance and tenant relations, but is ambiguous regarding capital expenditures exceeding a nominal amount and significant lease modifications. How should the property manager proceed to best uphold their fiduciary duty and adhere to regulatory requirements? Option A. Obtain written authorization from the owner for the significant repair after presenting a detailed cost-benefit analysis, and negotiate the lease concession with the tenant, seeking owner approval for any reduction exceeding a predefined minimal threshold outlined in the management agreement. Option B. Inform the owner of the need for the repair and the tenant's request, and await explicit written instructions for both before taking any action, even if it means delaying the repair and potentially losing the tenant. Option C. Authorize the significant repair using available reserve funds and grant the rent reduction to the tenant, assuming the owner would approve such actions given their beneficial nature for property value and tenant retention. Option D. Proceed with the significant repair immediately to prevent future problems, and grant the tenant a modest rent reduction to ensure retention, informing the owner of the actions taken after they are completed. Correct answer is A. Obtain written authorization from the owner for the significant repair after presenting a detailed cost-benefit analysis, and negotiate the lease concession with the tenant, seeking owner approval for any reduction exceeding a predefined minimal threshold outlined in the management agreement. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in property management, balancing the owner's immediate financial desires with the long-term health and legal compliance of the property. The professional challenge lies in interpreting the scope of the management agreement and ensuring all actions taken are within the agreed-upon authority and adhere to relevant regulations, specifically those governing property management in the U.S., as implied by the CPPM designation. A property manager must act as a fiduciary, prioritizing the owner's interests while also upholding legal and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the existing property management agreement to ascertain the manager's authority regarding capital expenditures and lease negotiations. If the agreement grants the manager discretion for expenditures up to a certain threshold or specific types of lease modifications, then proceeding within those parameters, while informing the owner, is appropriate. If the agreement is silent or restrictive, the manager must seek explicit written authorization from the owner before committing to significant repairs or lease concessions. This aligns with the fiduciary duty to act in the owner's best interest and the legal requirement to operate within the contractual scope of authority. The CPPM designation implies adherence to U.S. property management laws and ethical codes, which emphasize clear communication and documented authorization for financial decisions impacting the owner's assets. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the significant repairs without explicit owner approval, even if the manager believes it's in the owner's best interest. This violates the contractual agreement and the fiduciary duty by exceeding authorized scope and potentially incurring costs the owner has not agreed to. Another incorrect approach is to offer substantial lease concessions without consulting the owner. While it might retain a tenant, it directly impacts the owner's rental income, and such decisions typically require owner consent, especially when they deviate from standard lease terms or significantly reduce revenue. Finally, assuming the owner implicitly approves all actions that seem beneficial is a dangerous assumption that can lead to disputes and legal ramifications, as it bypasses the need for clear, documented consent for material decisions. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes contract review, clear communication, and documented authorization. When faced with a situation requiring a decision beyond the explicit terms of the management agreement, the professional course of action is to consult the agreement, identify the need for owner input, and obtain written approval before proceeding. This protects both the property manager and the owner by ensuring transparency and adherence to legal and contractual obligations. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent trend of increasing operating expenses and fluctuating rental income over the past fiscal year. As a certified professional property manager, CPPM, you are preparing the quarterly financial report for the property owner and a potential new investor. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the CPPM ethical and professional obligations for preparing and presenting these financial reports? Option A. Provide a high-level summary of total income and expenses without detailing the specific categories or reasons for fluctuations to avoid overwhelming the stakeholders. Option B. Present a single, comprehensive financial statement that includes all detailed transactions, assuming all parties can interpret the raw data. Option C. Highlight only the positive revenue streams and minimize the impact of increasing operating expenses to present a more optimistic financial outlook. Option D. Prepare two distinct reports, one for the owner focusing on profitability, cash flow, and budget variances, and a separate, summarized report for the potential investor highlighting key performance indicators and asset stability. Correct answer is B. Present a single, comprehensive financial statement that includes all detailed transactions, assuming all parties can interpret the raw data. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for property managers, balancing the need for clear, concise financial reporting with the diverse information requirements of various stakeholders. Owners, as investors, are primarily concerned with profitability, return on investment, and asset value. Lenders, if involved, will focus on debt service coverage and financial stability. Tenants, while not direct financial stakeholders in the same way, may have lease clauses that tie rent to specific financial metrics, requiring transparency. The professional challenge lies in synthesizing complex financial data into digestible formats that address these distinct needs without misrepresenting information or omitting critical details, all while adhering to relevant professional standards and disclosure requirements. The correct approach involves tailoring financial reports to the specific audience and their informational needs, ensuring compliance with the Certified Professional Property Manager (CPPM) Code of Ethics and any applicable regulatory disclosure requirements. This means presenting a clear overview of financial performance, highlighting key metrics relevant to each stakeholder group, and providing sufficient detail to support the presented information. For owners, this would include profitability, cash flow, and variance analysis against budget. For lenders, it would focus on solvency and debt service. This approach upholds the CPPM duty of competence and integrity, ensuring stakeholders receive accurate and relevant information for their decision-making. An incorrect approach that presents a single, highly detailed financial statement without segmentation or summarization for different stakeholders fails to meet the diverse informational needs. This can lead to confusion, misinterpretation, and a lack of confidence from owners and other parties. Another incorrect approach, which omits certain expenses or revenue streams to present a more favorable, albeit incomplete, picture, constitutes a breach of ethical duty and potentially regulatory disclosure obligations. This misrepresentation erodes trust and can have legal and financial repercussions. Presenting overly simplistic reports that lack sufficient detail to demonstrate financial performance or compliance with covenants would also be an unacceptable failure, as it does not provide the necessary transparency for informed decision-making. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their specific information requirements. This is followed by an assessment of the available financial data and the most effective methods for its presentation. The process must then involve a review against the CPPM Code of Ethics and any applicable regulatory guidelines to ensure accuracy, completeness, and fairness in reporting. Finally, a clear communication strategy should be employed to explain the reports and address any stakeholder queries. Question 5. Process analysis reveals that a property manager is marketing a vacant apartment. Several prospective tenants have submitted applications. The property manager is reviewing these applications and must decide which applicant to recommend to the owner. The manager has noted that one applicant appears to be a good fit based on their demeanor during the viewing, while another applicant has a slightly lower credit score than the ideal threshold but a strong rental history. A third applicant has a verifiable income that meets the owner's stated requirement. The manager is considering prioritizing the applicant with the best demeanor. Option A. Recommend the applicant with the strongest rental history, even if their credit score is slightly below the owner's stated threshold, as past performance is the best indicator of future behavior. Option B. Prioritize the applicant who exhibited the most favorable demeanor during the property viewing, as this suggests they will be a responsible tenant. Option C. Focus primarily on the applicant's verifiable income, as this is the most critical factor in ensuring rent payment. Option D. Evaluate all applicants based on a predetermined, objective set of screening criteria, including creditworthiness, income verification, and rental history, and recommend the applicant who best meets these criteria consistently. The correct answer is D. Evaluate all applicants based on a predetermined, objective set of screening criteria, including creditworthiness, income verification, and rental history, and recommend the applicant who best meets these criteria consistently. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the property owner's desire for a qualified tenant with the legal and ethical obligations to avoid discriminatory practices during the applicant screening process. A property manager must navigate these competing interests while adhering strictly to fair housing laws. The correct approach involves a systematic, objective screening process based on predefined, non-discriminatory criteria applied consistently to all applicants. This approach is right because it directly aligns with the principles of fair housing legislation, which prohibits discrimination based on protected characteristics. By focusing on factors such as creditworthiness, rental history, and income verification, the property manager ensures that decisions are based on legitimate business reasons and are defensible against any claims of discrimination. This methodical process minimizes subjective bias and upholds ethical standards of impartiality and fairness. An incorrect approach that relies on subjective impressions or personal biases during screening is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a direct violation of fair housing laws, which mandate equal housing opportunities for all individuals. Basing screening decisions on factors not directly related to an applicant's ability to fulfill lease obligations, such as personal preferences or assumptions about lifestyle, constitutes discriminatory practice. Another incorrect approach that involves deviating from established screening criteria for certain applicants, even with the intention of being accommodating, is also professionally flawed. This inconsistency can lead to accusations of preferential treatment or, conversely, discrimination against others who are subjected to stricter scrutiny. It undermines the integrity of the screening process and exposes the property manager and owner to legal risks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve establishing clear, written screening criteria before marketing a property. These criteria must be reviewed to ensure they are non-discriminatory and legally compliant. During the screening process, all applicants must be evaluated against these same criteria, with all decisions documented. Any concerns or rejections should be based solely on objective findings related to the applicant's ability to meet the lease terms and responsibilities, without regard to protected characteristics. This systematic and transparent approach is crucial for mitigating risk and upholding professional integrity. Question 6. The control framework reveals that a property manager is tasked with valuing a specialized industrial facility that generates significant rental income, but has very few directly comparable sales in the immediate market. Which valuation approach, when applied with appropriate adjustments for market conditions and income potential, would be most aligned with regulatory expectations for accurately reflecting the property's market value? Option A. Focusing on the sales comparison approach, with minimal consideration for the property's income-generating capacity. Option B. Primarily utilizing the income capitalization approach, supported by a secondary consideration of the sales comparison approach where applicable. Option C. Solely relying on the sales comparison approach, adjusting for any perceived differences in property characteristics. Option D. Exclusively employing the cost approach, estimating the replacement cost less depreciation. The correct answer is B. Primarily utilizing the income capitalization approach, supported by a secondary consideration of the sales comparison approach where applicable. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a property manager must determine the most appropriate valuation method for a unique commercial property, balancing the need for accuracy with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. The property's specific characteristics, such as its specialized use and limited comparable sales, necessitate a careful selection of valuation methodology to ensure the resulting valuation is both defensible and compliant with industry standards and relevant regulations governing property management and valuation. The correct approach involves utilizing a combination of valuation methods, primarily focusing on the income capitalization approach due to the property's commercial nature and income-generating potential. This approach is supported by the regulatory framework, which emphasizes valuations that reflect the property's current market value and future earning capacity. Specifically, the income capitalization approach directly addresses the economic benefits derived from the property, a key factor in commercial property valuation. When direct comparables are scarce, the income approach becomes more critical, allowing for adjustments based on market-derived rates of return and projected income streams. This method aligns with the principle of reflecting true market value as understood by investors and is often mandated or strongly recommended by professional bodies and regulatory guidelines for income-producing properties. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the sales comparison approach when comparable sales are scarce and not truly representative of the subject property's unique characteristics. This failure would violate the regulatory requirement for valuations to be based on the best available evidence and to accurately reflect market conditions. Over-reliance on a method that cannot adequately account for the property's specific attributes would lead to an inaccurate and potentially misleading valuation, breaching professional duty, and potentially contravening valuation standards. Another incorrect approach would be to exclusively use the cost approach for a mature commercial property. While the cost approach is useful for new or unique properties where depreciation is easier to estimate, it often fails to capture the economic realities of an established income-producing asset. The market value of such a property is more likely driven by its income-generating capacity than by the cost to replace it, making a valuation solely based on cost an inadequate reflection of market value and a deviation from regulatory expectations for commercial property appraisal. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the property's type, use, and market. Property manager must first identify the primary drivers of value for that specific asset. For income-producing properties, this typically points towards the income capitalization approach. The manager should then assess the availability and quality of data for all relevant valuation methods. If the sales comparison approach has limited reliable comparables, or the cost approach does not accurately reflect the property's economic life and market position, the manager must prioritize the method that best captures the property's income-generating potential and aligns with regulatory requirements for accurate and defensible valuations. This involves a reasoned judgment based on professional standards and the specific context of the property. Question 7. Benchmark analysis indicates that a significant portion of the property's HVAC systems are nearing the end of their operational lifespan, posing a risk of increased maintenance costs and potential tenant disruption. As the Certified Professional Property Manager, CPPM, you are tasked with planning and managing the capital improvement project for their replacement. Considering the CPPM fiduciary duty to the property owner and the need to maintain tenant satisfaction and regulatory compliance, which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for managing this capital expenditure? Option A. Prioritize a phased replacement strategy focusing on the most critical units first, utilizing energy-efficient models that offer long-term operational cost savings and meet current environmental standards, while ensuring transparent communication and phased budget approvals with the property owner. Option B. Select the HVAC system with the lowest upfront purchase price, regardless of long-term energy efficiency or potential maintenance costs, to maximize immediate cash flow for the owner. Option C. Focus solely on cosmetic upgrades to common areas that are more visible to tenants, deferring the HVAC system replacement until a more critical failure occurs to avoid significant immediate capital outlay. Option D. Proceed with the replacement of all HVAC units immediately without detailed consultation with the property owner, based on your professional judgment of the urgency, to avoid any potential future issues. The correct answer is A. Prioritize a phased replacement strategy focusing on the most critical units first, utilizing energy-efficient models that offer long-term operational cost savings and meet current environmental standards, while ensuring transparent communication and phased budget approvals with the property owner. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the long-term financial health of the property with the immediate needs and expectations of various stakeholders, including owners, tenants, and potentially regulatory bodies. A property manager must navigate competing priorities and ensure that capital expenditure decisions are not only financially sound, but also compliant with relevant regulations and ethical standards. The core challenge lies in justifying significant investment to stakeholders who may have different risk appetites and return horizons. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, data-driven and transparent process that prioritizes long-term value enhancement and regulatory compliance. This includes thorough due diligence, accurate cost-benefit analysis, and clear communication with all stakeholders. Specifically, it aligns with the Certified Professional Property Manager, CPPM, ethical guidelines which mandate acting in the best interest of the property owner, while also considering the impact on tenants and the community, and adhering to all applicable building codes and environmental regulations. The emphasis is on strategic planning that anticipates future needs and market trends, ensuring the property remains competitive and compliant. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the lowest initial cost without considering long-term operational efficiency, durability, or potential future regulatory changes would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the CPPM standard of prudent asset management and could lead to higher lifecycle costs, tenant dissatisfaction, and potential noncompliance with evolving building standards or environmental mandates. Another incorrect approach that bypasses proper stakeholder consultation and approval processes, proceeding with significant capital works based on the manager's sole discretion, is a direct violation of fiduciary duties and CPPM ethical principles. This undermines transparency, erodes trust, and exposes the property owner to financial and legal risks. It disregards the requirement for informed consent and responsible governance. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term aesthetic improvements over essential structural or system upgrades would also be a failure. While tenant satisfaction is important, neglecting critical infrastructure can lead to safety hazards, operational failures, and ultimately, a greater financial burden to rectify in the future, contradicting the CPPM duty to maintain and enhance the property's value and safety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Clearly defining the project's objectives and scope, aligning them with the property's strategic goals. 2. Conducting thorough research and due diligence, including market analysis, regulatory reviews, and technical assessments. 3. Developing a detailed budget and timeline, including contingency planning. 4. Engaging in open and transparent communication with all stakeholders, presenting clear justifications for proposed expenditures. 5. Obtaining necessary approvals and ensuring strict adherence to all legal and ethical requirements throughout the project lifecycle. Question 8. Strategic planning requires a property manager to develop and implement a comprehensive tenant selection policy, considering the Federal Fair Housing Act and potential state and local additions to protected classes. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance and ethical practice in tenant screening? Option A. Implement a strict first-come, first-served policy for all applicants without any additional screening to avoid any appearance of bias. Option B. Focus solely on an applicant's credit score and rental history, disregarding other factors that might be relevant to their ability to be a good tenant. Option C. Develop objective, written tenant screening criteria that are applied consistently to all applicants and train all staff on fair housing laws and the application of these criteria. Option D. Prioritize applicants based on the property owner's personal recommendations and stated preferences, as the owner has the ultimate authority over their property. The correct answer is C. Develop objective, written tenant screening criteria that are applied consistently to all applicants and train all staff on fair housing laws and the application of these criteria. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to navigate the complex and often nuanced landscape of fair housing laws, balancing the needs of the property owner with the rights of prospective tenants. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and financial penalties. The core challenge lies in ensuring that all leasing practices are non-discriminatory and comply with federal, state, and local fair housing mandates, particularly when dealing with protected classes. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive review of all leasing policies and procedures to ensure they align with the Fair Housing Act and any applicable state or local ordinances. This includes training staff on prohibited discriminatory practices, establishing objective tenant screening criteria, and maintaining thorough documentation of all leasing decisions. This approach is best practice because it demonstrates a commitment to legal compliance and ethical conduct, minimizing the risk of discriminatory actions and fostering an inclusive housing environment. Specifically, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, as amended, prohibits discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of dwellings based on race, color, religion, sex, familial status, national origin, and disability. Many states and localities have expanded these protected classes, requiring property managers to be aware of and adhere to these broader protections. An incorrect approach that involves relying solely on the owner's subjective preferences for tenants without considering fair housing laws is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This can lead to direct violations of the Fair Housing Act if those preferences result in discrimination against individuals belonging to protected classes. Another incorrect approach, which is to implement a first come, first served policy without any objective screening criteria, can inadvertently lead to discrimination. While seemingly neutral, such a policy can be challenged if it results in disparate impact on protected groups, especially if the property manager is not actively ensuring that the process is truly equitable and free from bias. Furthermore, failing to document the reasons for tenant selection or rejection creates a lack of transparency and can make it difficult to defend against allegations of discrimination. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of all applicable fair housing laws. This involves continuous education and staying updated on regulatory changes. Property managers should then develop clear, objective, and consistently applied tenant selection criteria that are job-related and consistent with business necessity. All staff involved in the leasing process must receive comprehensive training on fair housing laws and best practices. Finally, maintaining meticulous records of all interactions with prospective tenants and the rationale behind leasing decisions is crucial for demonstrating compliance and mitigating risk. Question 9. System analysis indicates that a property manager is responsible for overseeing the landscaping and groundskeeping of a multi-unit residential complex. During a routine inspection, the manager notes that several mature trees on the property have branches that are overhanging walkways and parking areas, and some areas of the lawn exhibit poor drainage, leading to standing water after rainfall. Considering the Certified Professional Property Manager (CPPM) regulatory framework and U.S. property management laws, which of the following approaches best addresses the identified issues from a risk management perspective? Option A. Defer any immediate action on the trees and drainage until a tenant formally reports an issue or an incident occurs to avoid unnecessary expenses. Option B. Implement a proactive tree trimming schedule for all overhanging branches and develop a plan to improve lawn drainage, prioritizing areas with the highest foot traffic and vehicle access. Option C. Engage a landscaping contractor to remove all mature trees that pose any potential risk, regardless of their current condition, to eliminate all possible future liabilities. Option D. Focus solely on aesthetic improvements to the landscaping, such as planting new flowers, and address the tree branches and drainage only if they become an obvious safety hazard. The correct answer is B. Implement a proactive tree trimming schedule for all overhanging branches and develop a plan to improve lawn drainage, prioritizing areas with the highest foot traffic and vehicle access. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent risks associated with managing exterior property appearance, specifically concerning landscaping and groundskeeping. Property managers must balance aesthetic appeal, tenant safety, environmental impact, and regulatory compliance. A failure in any of these areas can lead to significant liabilities, including personal injury claims, property damage, and regulatory fines. The CPPM designation implies a commitment to upholding the highest professional standards, which includes proactive risk management. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential hazards, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and implements appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to tenants and visitors, as well as the legal obligations to maintain a safe property. Specifically, in the U.S. context, property managers are guided by principles of negligence and premises liability, which require them to take reasonable steps to prevent foreseeable harm. This includes regular inspections, prompt repairs, and adherence to local ordinances regarding landscaping, such as tree trimming to prevent falling branches or ensuring proper drainage to avoid water damage and slip hazards. The CPPM framework emphasizes a systematic approach to property management, and risk assessment is a cornerstone of this. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost-cutting without considering safety implications is professionally unacceptable. This could involve neglecting essential maintenance like pruning overgrown bushes that obstruct visibility for drivers or pedestrians, or failing to address drainage issues that create icy patches in winter. Such omissions violate the duty of care and can lead to premises liability claims if an injury occurs. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for tenant well-being and a failure to uphold the property's condition. Another incorrect approach is to only address landscaping issues reactively, waiting for problems to arise before taking action. This reactive stance is insufficient for effective risk management. For example, waiting for a tree to show signs of disease before inspecting it could allow a condition to worsen, increasing the risk of a catastrophic failure and subsequent damage or injury. This approach fails to meet the standard of reasonable care expected of a property manager, which necessitates proactive identification and mitigation of potential hazards. Finally, an approach that prioritizes aesthetics over safety is also flawed. While curb appeal is important, it should never compromise the safety of individuals on the property. For instance, using decorative but slippery materials near entrances or failing to adequately light pathways due to landscaping choices would be a significant ethical and legal failing. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, identify all potential risks associated with landscaping and groundskeeping. Second, assess the severity and likelihood of each risk. Third, prioritize risks based on their potential impact. And fourth, develop and implement a mitigation plan that addresses the highest priority risks, ensuring compliance with all applicable laws and ethical standards. Question 10. Upon reviewing the quarterly financial report for a managed property, you notice a significant unexpected operating expense that has created a shortfall in the current quarter's budget. The property's preventive maintenance program, which is crucial for extending the life of HVAC systems and plumbing, is scheduled for its most intensive phase this quarter. You have the authority to reallocate funds within the operating budget. What is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Immediately cut the preventive maintenance budget by 25% to absorb the unexpected expense without consulting the property owner. Option B. Proceed with the scheduled preventive maintenance program as planned and present the financial shortfall and propose solutions to the property owner for their review and approval. Option C. Postpone all non-critical maintenance tasks indefinitely until the property's financial situation stabilizes and continue with only essential emergency repairs. Option D. Defer all scheduled preventive maintenance for this quarter to cover the unexpected operating expense with the intention of catching up on maintenance in future quarters. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the scheduled preventive maintenance program as planned and present the financial shortfall and propose solutions to the property owner for their review and approval. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between immediate cost savings and long-term property value and tenant satisfaction. A certified professional property manager, CPPM, must balance financial prudence with their fiduciary duty to the property owner and their ethical obligation to maintain a safe and functional environment for tenants. The decision requires careful judgment to avoid short-sighted choices that could lead to greater expenses and liabilities in the future. The correct approach involves prioritizing the preventive maintenance program, as outlined in the property's operational plan and budget. This approach is right because it aligns with the CPPM responsibility to proactively manage the property to reduce future repair costs, extend the lifespan of building systems, and ensure tenant comfort and safety. Regulatory frameworks for property management, such as those governing landlord-tenant relations and professional conduct, generally mandate responsible property upkeep. Ethically, a CPPM is expected to act in the best interest of the property owner, which includes preserving asset value and minimizing preventable deterioration. Implementing a robust preventive maintenance schedule is a cornerstone of this responsibility. An incorrect approach would be to defer scheduled preventive maintenance to cover unexpected operational shortfalls. This is ethically flawed because it prioritizes short-term financial relief over the long-term health of the property and the owner's investment. It can lead to premature equipment failure, increased emergency repair costs, potential tenant dissatisfaction due to system failures, and even safety hazards, all of which could result in legal liabilities for the property manager. Furthermore, it violates the principle of prudent asset management expected of a CPPM. Another incorrect approach would be to unilaterally cut the preventive maintenance budget without consulting the property owner or seeking alternative funding solutions. This demonstrates a lack of transparency and a failure to uphold the fiduciary duty owed to the owner. It bypasses the established operational plan and could be seen as a dereliction of professional duty, as it assumes the manager has the sole authority to alter fundamental operational strategies without owner consent. A third incorrect approach would be to postpone all non-critical maintenance indefinitely until a more favorable financial period. While some maintenance might be considered less urgent, a complete halt to preventive measures undermines the core purpose of such programs. It exposes the property to a higher risk of cascading failures and accelerated depreciation, ultimately costing the owner more in the long run and potentially violating lease agreements or building codes if essential systems are neglected. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the property's operational plan, budget, and any contractual obligations. When faced with unexpected financial pressures, the CPPM should first explore all available options for addressing the shortfall without compromising essential maintenance. This includes communicating transparently with the property owner, presenting the financial situation, and proposing solutions that might involve minor budget adjustments elsewhere or seeking owner approval for temporary measures. If preventive maintenance is deemed critical, the CPPM must advocate for its continuation, explaining the long-term consequences of deferral. The decision should always be guided by the principles of fiduciary duty, ethical conduct, and the overarching goal of preserving and enhancing the property's value. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals potential cost savings through adjustments to HVAC system maintenance schedules and a reduction in the frequency of common area cleaning. As a certified professional property manager, CPPM, what is the most appropriate decision-making framework to adopt in response to these findings? Option A. Prioritize only those recommendations that offer the most significant immediate cost reductions, regardless of other potential consequences. Option B. Immediately implement all cost-saving recommendations to maximize immediate financial benefits for the property owner. Option C. Dismiss the study's findings as potentially misleading and continue with current operational practices to avoid any disruption. Option D. Conduct a detailed impact assessment of each recommendation, considering operational, regulatory, tenant, and long-term asset value implications before making any decisions. Correct answer is B. Immediately implement all cost-saving recommendations to maximize immediate financial benefits for the property owner. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in property management, balancing immediate cost savings with long-term asset value and tenant satisfaction, all within a specific regulatory and ethical framework. The challenge lies in interpreting the efficiency study's findings and applying them judiciously, rather than as a blunt instrument for cost reduction. A professional property manager must consider not only the financial implications, but also the impact on the property's operational integrity, tenant experience, and compliance with relevant regulations. The correct approach involves a nuanced decision-making process that prioritizes a comprehensive assessment of the efficiency study's recommendations. This approach involves evaluating each recommendation individually, considering its potential impact on operational costs, tenant comfort, regulatory compliance, and the long-term capital expenditure plan for the property. Specifically, it requires cross-referencing the study's findings with lease agreements, building codes, and industry best practices to ensure that any proposed changes are both financially sound and legally permissible. This aligns with the CPPM ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the property owner, while also upholding tenant rights and maintaining the property's value, as mandated by professional standards and relevant property management legislation. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement all cost-saving measures suggested by the study without further due diligence. This could lead to regulatory noncompliance if, for example, a recommended reduction in maintenance frequency violates health and safety codes or lease covenants. It also fails to consider the potential for tenant dissatisfaction and increased future repair costs if essential preventative measures are cut. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the study entirely based on a superficial understanding of its implications. This overlooks potential opportunities for genuine efficiency gains and could result in the property owner missing out on cost savings that do not compromise operational quality or tenant well-being. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the immediate financial savings without considering the long-term impact on asset depreciation or the potential for increased operational risks. This short-sighted perspective can lead to greater expenses down the line and a decline in the property's overall value. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that includes 1. Thorough review and understanding of the efficiency study's findings. 2. Impact assessment of each recommendation on financial performance, operational efficiency, tenant satisfaction, regulatory compliance, and asset value. 3. Consultation with relevant stakeholders, e.g., maintenance staff, legal counsel, tenants where appropriate. 4. Prioritization of recommendations based on a balanced consideration of all impacts. And 5. Phased implementation with ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Question 12. Quality control measures reveal that a property manager is consistently using a subjective assessment of a prospective tenant's demeanor and personal presentation during initial viewings as a primary factor in their tenant selection process, alongside standard credit and income checks. This approach is being applied uniformly across all applicants. Option A. Continue using the subjective assessment of demeanor and personal presentation as a supplementary factor, provided it is documented and applied equally to all applicants, to gain a more holistic understanding of tenant suitability. Option B. Implement a standardized screening process that objectively verifies creditworthiness, income stability, and rental history, while ensuring all inquiries are directly related to the applicant's ability to fulfill lease obligations and are applied consistently to all applicants. Option C. Focus screening efforts primarily on the applicant's social media profiles and online presence to gauge their lifestyle and potential impact on the property, in addition to credit and income checks. Option D. Rely heavily on personal references from friends and family of the applicant, in addition to credit and income verification, to assess their character and reliability. The correct answer is B. Implement a standardized screening process that objectively verifies creditworthiness, income stability, and rental history, while ensuring all inquiries are directly related to the applicant's ability to fulfill lease obligations and are applied consistently to all applicants. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because property managers must balance the landlord's need to secure a reliable tenant with the legal and ethical obligations to avoid discriminatory practices during tenant screening. The core tension lies in gathering sufficient information to assess a prospective tenant's ability to meet lease obligations without infringing upon protected characteristics. Careful judgment is required to ensure all screening practices are consistently applied, objective, and compliant with fair housing laws. The correct approach involves a standardized, multifaceted screening process that objectively assesses a prospective tenant's creditworthiness, income verification, and rental history. This typically includes reviewing credit reports from reputable agencies, requesting proof of income, such as pay stubs or tax returns, to ensure it meets a predetermined ratio of rent to income, and contacting previous landlords for references regarding payment history and property care. This method is legally sound and ethically responsible, as it focuses solely on the applicant's financial capacity and past tenancy performance, which are legitimate factors in determining suitability, and avoids any consideration of protected characteristics. An incorrect approach that relies solely on subjective interviews to gauge a tenant's responsibility is professionally unacceptable. This method is highly susceptible to unconscious bias and can easily lead to discriminatory decisions based on protected characteristics, violating fair housing laws. Another incorrect approach that involves demanding excessive documentation beyond what is necessary to verify income and creditworthiness, such as detailed medical history or personal financial statements unrelated to rent payment, is also problematic. This can be seen as intrusive and may indirectly discriminate against individuals with certain financial circumstances or disabilities. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes applicants based on factors unrelated to their ability to pay rent or maintain the property, such as their social media presence or personal affiliations, is a significant ethical and legal failing. This practice opens the door to subjective judgment and potential discrimination, moving away from objective assessment of tenancy qualifications. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a consistent, documented, and legally compliant screening process. This involves establishing clear, objective criteria for tenant selection that are applied equally to all applicants. Regular training on fair housing laws and best practices for tenant screening is crucial. When in doubt, consulting legal counsel or industry best practice guidelines ensures that screening procedures remain robust, fair, and legally defensible. Question 13. Examination of the data shows that a tenant in a property managed under your care has requested a significant alteration to their unit, specifically asking to install a custom-built shelving unit that would require minor structural modifications to a wall. The lease agreement, which is currently in effect, does not contain any specific clauses addressing tenant-initiated structural modifications. As the Certified Professional Property Manager, CPPM, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Advise the tenant to submit a formal written request and then ignore it, assuming the owner would not approve such a request without further prompting. Option B. Directly deny the tenant's request, stating that the lease agreement does not permit such modifications and that the property manager cannot authorize any changes. Option C. Verbally approve the tenant's request, advising them to proceed with the installation and to inform the maintenance team of the planned work, as it is a minor alteration. Option D. Inform the tenant that all lease terms are binding and that no modifications can be made to the property without a formal written amendment signed by both the tenant and the property owner, and then present the tenant's request to the owner for their consideration. Correct answer is D. Inform the tenant that all lease terms are binding and that no modifications can be made to the property without a formal written amendment signed by both the tenant and the property owner, and then present the tenant's request to the owner for their consideration. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in property management. A tenant requesting a modification to a lease agreement after it has been signed. A professional challenge lies in balancing the property owner's rights and the tenant's needs while adhering strictly to the terms of the executed lease and relevant property management regulations. The property manager must avoid making unilateral changes that could invalidate the lease or create legal liabilities for the owner. The core difficulty is navigating the tenant's request without compromising the integrity of the legally binding document. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves formally documenting the tenant's request and presenting it to the property owner for their review and decision. This is the right course of action because a lease agreement is a legally binding contract. Any amendments or modifications to a signed lease agreement must be mutually agreed upon by all parties involved, landlord and tenant, and documented in writing, typically through a lease addendum or amendment. As a property manager, your role is to act as an agent for the owner, not to unilaterally alter contractual obligations. This approach ensures that the owner is fully informed and has the authority to approve or reject changes, thereby protecting their interests and maintaining the legal enforceability of the lease. It also aligns with ethical obligations to act in the best interest of the client, the owner, and to uphold contractual agreements. Incorrect approach is analysis. Approving the tenant's request verbally and instructing the maintenance team to proceed without formal owner approval is an incorrect approach. This bypasses the contractual process, potentially creating a breach of contract if the owner does not agree to the change. It also exposes the owner to unforeseen costs and liabilities. Furthermore, it undermines the property manager's fiduciary duty to the owner by making decisions that should be theirs. Directly denying the tenant's request without consulting the owner is also an incorrect approach. While the lease may not explicitly permit the requested modification, the owner may have reasons to approve it, such as tenant retention or a minor cost that enhances the property's value. A property manager's role is to facilitate communication and present options, not to make unilateral decisions that could negatively impact the landlord-tenant relationship or the owner's investment. Ignoring the tenant's request and hoping it goes away is an unprofessional and incorrect approach. This demonstrates a lack of responsiveness and can lead to tenant dissatisfaction, potential disputes, and damage to the property manager's reputation. It also fails to address a potential issue that could escalate if left unmanaged. Professional reasoning. Professionals in property management should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes clear communication, adherence to contractual obligations, and acting within the scope of their authority as an agent for the property owner. When faced with a tenant request to modify a lease, the process should involve 1. Acknowledging the tenant's request and understanding its nature. 2. Reviewing the existing lease agreement to determine if it addresses such modifications. 3. Communicating the request and relevant lease provisions to the property owner. 4. Presenting the owner with the tenant's request and any relevant information or recommendations. 5. Acting strictly according to the owner's documented decision, which may involve drafting a formal lease addendum if approved. This systematic approach ensures legal compliance, ethical conduct, and effective client representation. Question 14. Assessment of a property manager's strategy for addressing a significant upcoming roof replacement, considering the current operating budget constraints and the reserve fund balance. The property manager must decide how to best allocate resources and plan for this substantial capital expenditure while maintaining the property's overall financial health and regulatory compliance. Option A. Underfund the reserve for the roof replacement by assuming the lifespan of the current roof will be extended and that future material costs will remain stable, thereby minimizing current reserve contributions. Option B. Prioritize immediate operational efficiency and cosmetic improvements to enhance tenant satisfaction, allocating minimal funds to the reserve for the roof replacement, considering it a future problem. Option C. Conduct a detailed capital needs assessment to accurately project the roof replacement cost and its timeline. Then develop a reserve fund contribution plan that ensures sufficient funds are available when needed, communicating this plan transparently to the property owners. Option D. Defer the roof replacement for as long as possible, focusing all available funds on immediate operational needs, and hoping that future budgets will allow for the repair without significant owner assessments. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed capital needs assessment to accurately project the roof replacement cost and its timeline. Then develop a reserve fund contribution plan that ensures sufficient funds are available when needed, communicating this plan transparently to the property owners. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to balance the immediate needs of the property with long-term financial sustainability, all while adhering to specific regulatory requirements for reserve fund management. The pressure to defer necessary capital expenditures to maintain a lower operating budget in the short term can conflict with the fiduciary duty to preserve and enhance the property's value and ensure its long-term viability. Careful judgment is required to forecast future needs accurately and to allocate funds appropriately, considering both operational efficiency and the necessity of capital improvements. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive strategy for capital expenditure planning and reserve fund management. This entails conducting thorough, regular capital needs assessments to identify upcoming repairs and replacements, projecting their costs, and establishing a funding plan for the reserve fund that is adequate to meet these projected expenditures. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible property management, which mandates safeguarding the asset's value and ensuring its habitability and functionality for the long term. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing homeowners associations or condominium boards, often mandate specific reserve fund levels and require transparent reporting to owners, underscoring the importance of this diligent planning. Ethical obligations require property managers to act in the best interest of the property owner or association, which includes ensuring the property's long-term financial health. An incorrect approach that prioritizes deferring capital expenditures to minimize current operating expenses fails to acknowledge the long-term consequences. This can lead to a deterioration of the property's condition, increased emergency repair costs, and a significant financial burden on owners when major replacements become unavoidable and reserves are insufficient. This approach violates the fiduciary duty to protect the asset and can contravene specific regulations that require adequate reserves for capital items. Another incorrect approach that involves underfunding the reserve based on optimistic assumptions about future costs or the lifespan of components is also professionally unacceptable. This creates a false sense of financial security while setting the property up for future financial distress. It is a failure of due diligence and can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including potential liability for the property manager if the underfunding is deemed negligent. A further incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate operational needs without considering future capital requirements neglects a critical aspect of property management. While managing day-to-day expenses is vital, it must be integrated with a forward-looking capital planning strategy. Ignoring future capital needs, even if current operations are efficient, is a dereliction of duty and can lead to severe financial and physical consequences for the property. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic framework. 1. Understand and adhere to all applicable regulatory requirements regarding budgeting, operating expenses, capital expenditures, and reserve funds. 2. Conduct regular, comprehensive capital needs assessments, involving qualified professionals where necessary to identify and estimate future repair and replacement costs. 3. Develop a realistic and sustainable reserve fund study and funding plan, projecting contributions and expenditures over a defined period. 4. Communicate transparently with owners or stakeholders about the property's financial status, including reserve fund levels and planned capital expenditures. 5. Prioritize expenditures based on a combination of urgency, impact on property value, and long-term financial planning, always balancing short-term operational needs with long-term capital requirements. Question 15. Which approach would be most appropriate for a certified professional property manager, CPPM, when a long-term, reliable vendor offers a significant personal discount on a service for the manager's own residents in exchange for continued preferential vendor status on managed properties, without the property owner's explicit knowledge or consent? Option A. Accept the vendor's personal discount, considering it a reward for loyalty and a way to foster a good working relationship, and then subtly pass on a similar perceived value to tenants through minor concessions on their next lease renewal. Option B. Inform the property owner of the vendor's offer and request their approval to accept the personal discount, while also proposing a formal review of the vendor's contract and performance to ensure it remains in the owner's best interest. Option C. Accept the vendor's personal discount and use it as leverage to negotiate a slightly lower rate from the vendor for the managed properties, without disclosing the personal benefit to the property owner. Option D. Politely decline the vendor's personal offer, explaining that professional ethics and company policy prohibit such arrangements, and suggest the vendor discuss any service improvements or pricing adjustments directly with the property owner, or through the standard procurement process. The correct answer is D. Politely decline the vendor's personal offer, explaining that professional ethics and company policy prohibit such arrangements, and suggest the vendor discuss any service improvements or pricing adjustments directly with the property owner or through the standard procurement process. Explanation. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma for property managers, balancing the need for cost-effective vendor services with the obligation to ensure fair and transparent dealings with tenants and the duty to uphold contractual agreements. The challenge lies in navigating potential conflicts of interest and maintaining professional integrity when faced with a tempting but potentially problematic offer. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency, adherence to contractual obligations, and the best interests of the property owner and tenants. This means formally documenting any proposed changes, obtaining necessary approvals, and ensuring that any vendor concessions do not negatively impact the tenant's lease terms or create an unfair advantage. Specifically, under general contract law principles applicable in most jurisdictions, including those relevant to property management, any amendment to an existing contract requires mutual agreement and consideration. Furthermore, ethical guidelines for property managers often mandate acting with honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of the client, the property owner, while also respecting the rights of tenants as outlined in their leases. An incorrect approach would be to accept the vendor's offer without proper documentation or disclosure. This could lead to breaches of contract, as the original agreement with the vendor may not have accounted for such concessions, potentially creating an unrecorded financial benefit for the manager. Ethically, this could be viewed as a conflict of interest or even self-dealing if the manager personally benefits from the arrangement without the property owner's knowledge and consent. Another incorrect approach would be to unilaterally alter the tenant's lease terms to reflect the vendor's offer without the tenant's explicit agreement and without formal amendment. This violates the tenant's contractual rights and could lead to legal disputes. Accepting the vendor's offer and then passing the benefit directly to the tenant without informing the property owner is also problematic, as it bypasses the owner's oversight and decision-making authority regarding property finances and tenant relations. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the terms of all existing contracts with vendors and tenants. They should then communicate openly with the property owner about the vendor's offer and its potential implications. Any proposed changes to vendor agreements or tenant leases must be formally documented, agreed upon by all parties, and comply with relevant laws and ethical standards. This ensures accountability, protects all parties from potential disputes, and upholds the manager's professional reputation. Question 16. Implementation of a rent collection policy for a multi-unit residential property requires a property manager to address a tenant who has consistently paid rent late for the past 3 months. The lease agreement clearly states the due date and grace period. The property manager needs to decide on the most appropriate next step to ensure timely rent collection while remaining compliant with all applicable regulations. Option A. Accept the late payments without further action, assuming the tenant will eventually rectify the situation on their own. Option B. Change the locks on the tenant's unit and remove their belongings to prevent further unauthorized occupancy. Option C. Immediately issue a formal notice to quit for non-payment of rent, as the tenant has demonstrated a pattern of late payments. Option D. Contact the tenant to understand the reason for the late payments, offer a documented payment plan for the arrears, and clearly reiterate the lease terms and consequences of continued late payments. The correct answer is C. Immediately issue a formal notice to quit for non-payment of rent, as the tenant has demonstrated a pattern of late payments. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because a property manager must balance the property owner's financial interests with the legal rights and protections afforded to tenants. Implementing a rent collection policy requires strict adherence to the governing laws to avoid legal repercussions, such as wrongful eviction claims or fines. The manager must also maintain positive landlord-tenant relationships where possible, as this can reduce turnover and associated costs. Careful judgment is required to determine when to escalate from gentle reminders to formal notices, ensuring all actions are documented and legally sound. The correct approach involves a systematic, documented process that strictly adheres to the relevant jurisdiction's landlord-tenant laws regarding late rent and eviction. This typically includes providing legally mandated notice periods, offering reasonable payment plans if permitted and appropriate, and initiating formal eviction proceedings only after all other avenues have been exhausted and all legal prerequisites have been met. This approach ensures compliance with regulations, protects the property owner from legal challenges, and demonstrates professional diligence. An approach that immediately resorts to changing locks or shutting off utilities is fundamentally flawed. This constitutes an illegal self-help eviction, which is a serious violation of tenant rights in most jurisdictions and can lead to significant legal penalties for the property manager and owner. Another incorrect approach is to accept partial payments without issuing a formal receipt or understanding the legal implications of accepting partial payment after a notice to quit has been served. In some jurisdictions, accepting partial payment can invalidate a previously served notice and require the entire process to be restarted, causing delays and potential financial loss. Finally, an approach that ignores late payments for an extended period without any communication or action is also professionally unsound. This can lead to significant arrears, making recovery difficult and potentially signaling to other tenants that rent payment is not a strict requirement, which erodes the overall rent collection discipline. It also fails to uphold the property owner's right to timely rental income. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, clear communication, and a graduated response to late payments. This involves understanding the specific statutes governing landlord-tenant relations, maintaining meticulous records of all communications and transactions, and consulting legal counsel when complex situations arise or when initiating formal legal action. Question 17. Strategic planning requires a property manager to develop a robust framework for property inspections, considering the need to identify maintenance issues proactively, ensure property condition, and uphold tenant rights. Which of the following inspection strategies best aligns with professional property management standards and regulatory compliance? Option A. Schedule frequent, unannounced inspections to ensure tenants are maintaining the property to a high standard, prioritizing the owner's immediate concerns over tenant privacy. Option B. Perform inspections solely based on the owner's ad hoc requests, without a standardized schedule or consideration for tenant notification protocols. Option C. Conduct inspections only in response to tenant-reported issues or when a property becomes vacant, relying on tenant communication as the primary indicator of maintenance requirements. Option D. Implement a schedule of regular, documented inspections based on property type, age, and risk assessment, with appropriate notice provided to tenants, focusing on identifying potential maintenance needs before they become significant issues. The correct answer is D. Implement a schedule of regular documented inspections based on property type, age, and risk assessment, with appropriate notice provided to tenants, focusing on identifying potential maintenance needs before they become significant issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a property manager must balance the need for thorough property inspections with the practical constraints of time, resources, and tenant relations. Overly frequent or intrusive inspections can lead to tenant dissatisfaction and potential breaches of quiet enjoyment, while infrequent inspections risk overlooking critical maintenance issues that could escalate into significant financial liabilities or safety hazards. The Certified Professional Property Manager, CPPM, designation implies a commitment to upholding professional standards, which includes adhering to relevant landlord-tenant laws and ethical guidelines governing property management. The correct approach involves establishing a systematic, risk-based inspection schedule. This means prioritizing inspections based on property age, type, recent maintenance history, and any specific lease provisions or regulatory requirements. Regular, documented inspections allow for proactive identification of maintenance needs, ensuring the property is kept in good repair, thereby protecting the owner's investment and complying with obligations to provide a safe and habitable environment. This approach aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to both the property owner and the tenant, and it supports compliance with any applicable housing codes or property maintenance regulations. An approach that prioritizes only reactive maintenance, addressing issues only when reported by tenants or when they become critical, is professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct regular inspections means potential problems are missed, leading to increased repair costs, tenant inconvenience, and potential legal liability for the property owner due to neglect or failure to maintain habitability. It also breaches the ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the property owner by not proactively managing the asset. Another incorrect approach is conducting inspections solely based on tenant requests or complaints. While tenant feedback is valuable, it should not be the sole driver of inspection frequency. This reactive stance can lead to missed issues that tenants may not notice or report, and it fails to fulfill the property manager's proactive responsibility for property upkeep. It also risks inconsistent application of inspection standards. Finally, an approach that involves conducting inspections without proper notice to tenants, or in a manner that infringes upon their right to quiet enjoyment, is ethically and legally flawed. While inspections are necessary, they must be conducted in accordance with lease agreements and relevant landlord-tenant laws, which typically require reasonable notice. Failure to do so can result in legal disputes and damage to the property manager's professional reputation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a comprehensive understanding of the property's condition, lease terms, and all applicable local, state, and federal regulations. A risk assessment should be performed to determine the optimal inspection frequency and focus for each property. Documentation of all inspection, findings, and subsequent actions is crucial for accountability and legal protection. Question 18. During the evaluation of a multi-story building containing several retail storefronts on the ground floor and multiple apartment units on the upper floors, a property manager must determine the most appropriate classification for regulatory and operational purposes. The manager needs to decide whether to classify it as primarily residential, primarily commercial, industrial, or mixed use, considering the implications for leasing, zoning, and compliance. Option A, classify the property as mixed use, acknowledging the distinct residential and commercial functions present within the same structure. Option B, classify the property as industrial based on the building's construction type. Option C, classify the property solely as commercial, focusing on the retail storefronts. Option D, classify the property solely as residential, focusing on the presence of apartment units. The correct answer is A. Classify the property as mixed use, acknowledging the distinct residential and commercial functions present within the same structure. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for property managers, accurately classifying a property for regulatory and operational purposes. Misclassification can lead to non-compliance with zoning laws, leasing regulations, and even insurance requirements, potentially resulting in fines, legal disputes, and reputational damage. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the primary use and the interplay of different property types within a single structure. Careful judgment is required to determine the dominant function and ensure all components are considered within the appropriate legal and operational framework. The The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the property's primary function and its components, aligning with the Certified Professional Property Manager (CPPM) ethical code and relevant local zoning ordinances. This means identifying the dominant use that dictates the property's classification. For instance, if a building primarily houses retail shops with a few residential units above, it would be classified as mixed use, with specific considerations for both commercial and residential regulations. This approach ensures compliance with all applicable laws, such as Landlord-Tenant Acts for residential units and commercial lease regulations for retail spaces, as well as adherence to zoning that permits the combination of uses. An incorrect approach would be to classify the property solely based on the presence of residential units, ignoring the significant commercial activity. This failure to acknowledge the commercial aspect would lead to noncompliance with commercial leasing laws, business licensing requirements, and potentially fire and safety codes specific to commercial establishments. Another incorrect approach would be to classify it solely as commercial, overlooking the residential component. This would result in a failure to comply with residential landlord-tenant protections, fair housing laws applicable to residential tenancies, and potentially lead to disputes over tenant rights and eviction procedures. A third incorrect approach might be to simply label it as other, without a clear justification, demonstrating a lack of due diligence and an inability to apply established property classification principles, which is a failure of professional responsibility. Professionals should approach such situations by first consulting local zoning ordinances and property use definitions. They should then conduct a detailed site inspection to assess the proportion and nature of each use. If the property clearly fits the definition of mixed use, they must then research and apply the specific regulations governing each component of the property. Documenting the classification rationale based on these findings is crucial for future reference and compliance. Question 19. Governance review demonstrates that a property manager has initiated eviction proceedings against a tenant for non-payment of rent. The manager, eager to re-rent the unit quickly, has considered skipping the formal written notice period and instead informing the tenant verbally that they must vacate within 48 hours or the locks will be changed. The manager also plans to accept any rent offered by the tenant during this period, believing it shows goodwill. Which of the following actions best aligns with the legal eviction procedures for a certified professional property manager, CPPM, operating under U.S. federal and state landlord-tenant laws? Option A. Verbally inform the tenant they have 48 hours to vacate, change the locks if they do not leave, and accept any rent offered to avoid further conflict. Option B. Serve the tenant with a legally compliant written notice to pay rent or quit, specifying the amount owed and the time frame to remedy the default, and if not remedied, proceed with filing an unlawful detainer action with the court. Option C. Accept any rent offered by the tenant, and then proceed with a verbal notice to vacate within 72 hours, as this demonstrates flexibility. Option D. Immediately file an unlawful detainer action with the court, without providing any prior written notice to the tenant, as the rent is overdue. The correct answer is B. Serve the tenant with a legally compliant written notice to pay rent or quit, specifying the amount owed and the time frame to remedy the default, and if not remedied, proceed with filing an unlawful detainer action with the court. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to navigate a sensitive legal process while balancing the rights of both the landlord and the tenant. Missteps in eviction procedures can lead to significant legal repercussions, financial penalties, and damage to professional reputation. The core challenge lies in adhering strictly to the prescribed legal framework to ensure fairness and prevent unlawful actions. The correct approach involves meticulously following the statutory notice periods and procedures mandated by the relevant jurisdiction's landlord-tenant laws. This includes providing the tenant with the legally required written notice, specifying the grounds for eviction, and allowing the tenant the statutory time to remedy the breach or vacate the premises. If the tenant fails to comply, the next step is to file the appropriate legal action with the court, such as an unlawful detainer lawsuit. This methodical, legally compliant process ensures that the eviction is lawful and defensible, protecting the landlord's interests while respecting the tenant's due process rights. An incorrect approach that involves bypassing formal notice requirements and attempting to force a tenant out through intimidation or by changing locks would be a severe violation of tenant protection laws. This constitutes an illegal eviction or self-help eviction, which is strictly prohibited and can result in substantial damages awarded to the tenant, including punitive damages, legal fees, and potential criminal charges. Another incorrect approach, such as accepting partial rent after serving a notice to quit for non-payment without explicitly agreeing to waive the notice, can inadvertently invalidate the eviction notice and require the landlord to restart the entire process, causing delays and increased costs. This is because accepting rent can be interpreted as an acceptance of the tenancy continuing under the original terms, thereby waiving the landlord's right to proceed with the eviction based on the prior notice. A third incorrect approach, failing to properly serve the eviction notice according to legal requirements, e.g., improper method of delivery or incorrect information on the notice, renders the notice legally deficient and unenforceable, forcing the landlord to start over. Professionals should approach eviction situations by first thoroughly understanding the specific landlord-tenant statutes governing their jurisdiction. This involves consulting legal counsel when necessary, maintaining meticulous records of all communications and actions, and strictly adhering to all procedural timelines and requirements. A systematic, documented, and legally sound approach is paramount to achieving a lawful eviction and mitigating risk. Question 20. Performance analysis shows a high vacancy rate and pressure to lease units quickly. During an initial phone inquiry for an apartment, a prospective tenant asks about the availability of units suitable for a family with young children. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant approach for the property manager to take? Option A. Suggests that certain units might be more suitable for single individuals or couples, implying that units for families with children may have limited availability or specific restrictions. Option B. Inform the prospective tenant about the general availability of units and explain the standardized, objective tenant screening process that all applicants must undergo, focusing on verifiable criteria such as income and rental history, without inquiring about their family composition. Option C. Explain that while units are available, the property prioritizes tenants who are likely to be long-term residents, and inquire further about their family situation to gauge their long-term commitment. Option D. Ask the prospective tenant for details about their family size and the ages of their children to better understand their needs and determine if the unit would be a good long-term fit. Correct answer is B. Inform the prospective tenant about the general availability of units and explain the standardized, objective tenant screening process that all applicants must undergo, focusing on verifiable criteria such as income and rental history, without inquiring about their family composition. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to balance the business need to fill vacancies with the absolute legal and ethical imperative to avoid discriminatory practices. The pressure to lease units quickly can inadvertently lead to decisions that, while seemingly efficient, violate fair housing laws. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all prospective tenants are treated equitably and that leasing practices are neutral and objective. The correct approach involves implementing a standardized, objective tenant screening process that is applied consistently to all applicants. This process should focus solely on criteria directly related to the applicant's ability to fulfill the lease obligations, such as income verification, credit history, and rental history. By adhering to a predefined, non-discriminatory set of criteria, the property manager ensures compliance with fair housing laws, which prohibit discrimination based on protected characteristics. This approach minimizes the risk of subjective bias influencing leasing decisions and upholds ethical standards of equal opportunity. An incorrect approach that involves asking prospective tenants about their family status or marital status during the initial inquiry is a direct violation of fair housing regulations. These questions are considered discriminatory because they can lead to decisions based on protected characteristics, such as familial status or sex, which are prohibited under fair housing laws. Such inquiries can create an environment where applicants feel they are being judged on factors unrelated to their tenancy qualifications, leading to potential legal challenges and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves prioritizing applicants based on their perceived likelihood of long-term tenancy, without objective, predefined criteria, is also problematic. While a desire for stable tenants is understandable, this subjective assessment opens the door to unconscious bias. If this perceived likelihood is influenced by assumptions related to protected classes, e.g., Assuming a young single person is less likely to stay than a family or vice versa, it constitutes discrimination. The focus must remain on verifiable qualifications. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves deviating from the established screening criteria for certain applicants based on personal rapport or intuition is a significant ethical and legal failing. While building rapport is part of customer service, it should never supersede the requirement for objective, consistent application of screening standards. Such deviations can be perceived as preferential treatment or, conversely, as discriminatory exclusion, depending on the applicant's protected characteristics. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a strong understanding of fair housing laws, the establishment of clear, written leasing policies and procedures, and consistent training for all leasing staff. When faced with an applicant, the property manager should refer to these established policies, focusing solely on objective, verifiable criteria. If there is any doubt about whether a particular question or practice might be perceived as discriminatory, it is best to err on the side of caution and consult legal counsel or a fair housing expert. The goal is to create a transparent and equitable leasing process for all.